She built her empire from ambition and sleepless nights. Every deal signed, every headline earned, carved her name into glass and steel. But power is a fragile kingdom, and tonight it shattered. The rain came down like judgment, washing the city of its secrets. Elena Royce moved through it barefoot, breath sharp, ankle twisted, clutching the only truth she had left, a tiny drive that could destroy a man and free her soul. Behind her, footsteps echoed. Ahead, only darkness waited. For the first time, the woman who once commanded rooms could barely command her heartbeat. They said she was fearless. They never saw her like this, soaked, shaking, begging the night for mercy. She whispered into the storm, "Please. I can't walk." And the city did not answer. It only rained harder, as if trying to wash her away. They would call this her downfall. But later, she would remember it as the night something greater began. The night pride drowned, and humanity finally surfaced. When salvation came, it didn't roar in on sirens or luxury cars. It came quietly, one man, one umbrella, and a child half asleep against his shoulder. Marcus Grant had no reason to stop. He was a mechanic, a single father with groceries in one hand and exhaustion in the other. But some hearts are trained to move before the mind can argue. He saw her collapse in the alley and stepped forward without thinking. The shadow chasing her fled at the sight of him, maybe from fear, maybe from shame. And suddenly the night wasn't an enemy anymore, it was witness to something rare. He asked no questions. He simply lifted her, gentle but sure, as rainwater pooled around their feet. The woman of boardrooms and headlines was weightless in his arms. And the world, for a heartbeat, went still. He didn't have wealth or power, only courage. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change the course of a life. The storm followed them home, whispering against old windows. Inside, the air smelled of oil, bread, and second chances. He laid her on a worn couch, found a blanket, lit a lamp whose shade tilted slightly, imperfections that somehow felt perfect. And for the first time in years, she wasn't performing. She was simply breathing. A child's voice drifted through the room. "Daddy, is she a princess?" He smiled. "Something like that, a princess who lost her shoes." And the child declared with authority, "Then she needs cocoa." Kindness, simple and uncalculated, filled the silence. He cleaned her wound with hands rough from work yet tender with intention. He offered soup, warmth, and quiet, expecting nothing in return. In that small apartment, patched and humble, she found what towers of glass had never given her, peace. It seeped into her like the warmth of a fire after a storm. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself sleep. Morning arrived gently, cautious not to wake her too fast. The storm had rinsed the world clean. She woke beneath a borrowed blanket, the flash drive still in her hand. The last weapon from her old life. Across the room, her shoes stood by the door, washed and mended. Someone had stitched the broken strap. On the refrigerator hung a drawing. A princess with a hurt foot, smiling beneath a crooked sun. Below it, a child's handwriting wished her well. Luxury had once surrounded her, assistants, cars, endless noise. Yet no one had ever cared this simply. Through the open window drifted the scent of wet soil and the hum of work. Outside, Marcus sang to his daughter while tightening a bolt beneath a car. The melody was rough, off-key, but pure. And she understood something she'd never learned in boardrooms. Peace isn't earned by control. It's found in moments that ask nothing of you. She smiled, not the practiced smile of photographs. But the small, unguarded kind that comes from remembering you're still alive. Memory is cruelly honest. It never lets you forget who you were when no one was watching. Elena's past rose like fog. Glass towers, late-night meetings, champagne toasts to hollow victories. Her fiancé, Victor Hale, whispering promises that always came with conditions. A penthouse where silence echoed louder than applause. She had called it success. But success had demanded everything: sleep, trust, and love. And returned nothing but emptiness in designer clothing. While she chased headlines, another life unfolded elsewhere. Marcus tightening bolts under fading light. A toddler handing him a wrench too big for her small hands. Laughter filling spaces grief had once occupied. He had lost his wife, but not his capacity to care. He had chosen presence over wealth. Time over ambition. A home over a title. One had everything to lose. The other had already lost it all. And now, in the same small town, their stories began to braid together. Not through fate or miracle, but through the quiet persistence of kindness. She didn't know it yet. But every pain, every fall, had been leading her here. To this simple place where healing waited in oil, rain, and laughter. Morning tasted like laughter and maple syrup. The storm had passed, but a different warmth stayed behind. Marcus stood at the stove, humming to the rhythm of a pan sizzling with pancakes. His daughter stirred the batter with a wooden spoon twice her size. And flour drifted through the air like dust caught in sunlight. Elena watched them from the doorway, half a guest, half a ghost. Wondering how the smallest room she had ever stood in could suddenly feel so alive. He caught her watching, smiled, and said nothing. Because some smiles don't need explanation. They simply ask you to stay a little longer. She tried to refuse the kindness. Old habits die hard. People like her were supposed to owe, to pay, to leave. But then the child looked up with syrup on her chin and declared, "We have pancakes. Pancakes make people better." And for the first time in years, Elena laughed without permission. She stayed, not because she had to, but because something inside her finally wanted to. Days began to fold into one another, stitched together by the small rhythm of ordinary life. The woman who once commanded glass towers now burned toast, tripped over toy cars, and learned the delicate science of flipping pancakes without chaos. Marcus showed her how to tighten a bolt. And when grease marked her cheek, she didn't flinch, she laughed. He called her rookie. She called him teacher. Lena called them both funny. In the evenings, the three of them sat around a table too small for ambition, and large enough for joy. Homework, jokes, stories of a world far from boardrooms. Elena learned that silence could mean comfort. She learned that peace could hum through the sound of a radio and a child's laughter. And she learned that success is measured not in numbers, but in how softly someone looks at you when you aren't speaking. In the noise of engines and laughter. She remembered what silence used to mean. Not emptiness, but peace. Night fell again, gentle but heavy. Rain returned, tapping the windows like an old friend asking to come in. Elena sat across from Marcus at a worn kitchen table. Steam curling from their mugs. The hum of the clock marking every heartbeat. Truth waited on her tongue. "I was running," she whispered at last. The words trembled. But the air around them didn't. He just nodded, inviting her to continue. She told him everything. The betrayal, the lies, the headlines sharpening their knives. Each word peeled away another layer of the armor she had worn too long. He listened, not as a rescuer, not as a judge, but as a man who knew the shape of loss. Then he spoke of his wife, the long hospital nights. The moment grief became a language he never wanted to speak again. They sat there, two broken hearts telling different stories of the same ache. And somehow, in the quiet that followed, their pain stopped echoing. Healing did not arrive with ceremony. It came disguised as two people sharing tea. And the fragile honesty of being understood. The days that followed were softer. Unspoken words began to live in glances. A hand brushing another while passing a cup. A shared smile that lasted a beat too long. Lena's drawings changed. Now 3 stick figures stood beneath the sun. Each one holding hands. At the top she wrote, "My family." They laughed over burnt pancakes. Mocked each other's cooking. And filled the small house with the sound of belonging. Then the storm came again. Lightning cutting across the sky, power flickering. The room plunged into dark. Marcus lit a candle. Lena giggled beneath a blanket, watching shadows dance on the wall. Elena sat nearby, heart steady for once. Love didn't crash into the room like thunder. It arrived quietly. Carrying a flashlight in the dark. And in that candlelight glow, she realized that safety wasn't the absence of danger. It was the presence of someone who stayed. Peace is a fragile visitor. It doesn't knock before leaving. The morning began like any other. Coffee brewing, radio humming. Until the television whispered her name. Elena Royce missing, accused of theft. Her picture filled the screen, confident, flawless, a stranger. The towel slipped from her hands. The world she thought she'd left behind had found its way to this doorstep. Outside, engines idled. Voices gathered. The hunt had arrived with microphones and cameras. Panic rose fast, sharp, familiar. Her body remembered what her heart begged her to forget, run. She reached for her bag, for the flash drive, for escape. But before she could open the door, Marcus stood there, steady as stone. "You don't have to run this time," he said. It wasn't an order. It was a promise. The world could twist her story. But it could no longer take her courage. The truth had found her. But so had something stronger. Courage. And courage, once awakened, doesn't run. It stands. Every story has a moment when running ends. For Elena, it began with the click of high heels on a marble floor she once ruled. The city had waited for her return. But not like this, cameras flashing, voices sharp. The same lights that once celebrated her now trying to burn her down. She entered the building she had built. The air smelled of polish and fear. Her reflection stared back from the glass walls. Older, clearer, unafraid. They thought she came to beg. Instead, she came to speak. When they asked where she'd been, she said, healing. When they accused her of hiding, she said, sometimes silence is survival. Then she laid the truth bare. A drive filled with proof. The numbers, the transfers, the signatures that had caged her life. It glowed on the screen behind her like dawn breaking through storm clouds. The room that once worshipped power fell silent before integrity. And for the first time in years, she felt light in her chest. Not from victory, but from release. Power isn't in silence. It's in finally being heard. When she walked out, she didn't look back. Because freedom doesn't live in boardrooms. It waits in the people who believe you're more than your mistakes. The road home was quieter than she remembered. Fields passed like pages turning. And the city that once defined her shrank in the rearview mirror. When she reached the small town, the sun was setting in gold. And the workshop stood exactly as she left it. Humble, alive, waiting. Marcus looked up from beneath a car hood. Their eyes met, and all the words she thought she'd need dissolved. Lena ran first, hair flying, laughter spilling into the air. Elena knelt to catch her. And in that small pair of arms, she found forgiveness she hadn't asked for. She wasn't returning to hide. She was returning to begin. Later, they sat around the table again. 3 mugs, steam rising, stories mingling with quiet smiles. The walls that once echoed with loneliness now breathed warmth. She had walked away from titles. And toward home. Sometimes the greatest reward for surviving the storm is finding someone who waded through it. Dawn crept soft and golden. The ground outside was damp with promise. Marcus dug a small hole behind the workshop. Elena knelt beside him, hands steady, holding a sapling. Lena danced around them, barefoot in dew. A wooden sign clutched in her fist that read, "New Beginnings." Together, they lowered the roots into the soil. Her manicured hands, once meant for boardrooms, pressed earth like prayer. He asked, "Think it'll survive?" She smiled. "If we care." From the ruins of her past, something tender began to grow. It wasn't just a tree. It was proof that broken things could still take root. That time and kindness could turn loss into soil. And soil into life. Healing isn't about forgetting what broke you. It's choosing to nurture what comes after. And as the morning light caught the leaves, she realized she had finally stopped waiting for permission to live. Some roots take time. Others find home the moment two hearts stop running. The days that followed were ordinary. And that was the miracle. Sunlight spilled across worn wooden floors. Coffee brewed, radio songs drifted through open windows. The world no longer demanded she prove her worth. She could just be. Marcus cooked breakfast. This time she didn't burn the pancakes. Lena cheered as if it were a victory worth framing. And it was, because joy, she learned, hides in the smallest wins. Afternoons filled with laughter. With tools clinking, bikes wobbling down dirt roads. Neighbors waving, life moving forward in gentle loops. Evenings brought peace. The three of them beneath a string of lights. The tree behind the workshop growing taller. Its leaves whispering in the wind like a lullaby. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It came in mornings shared. In the comfort of voices that called her name softly. In a world that finally let her breathe. She had thought her story ended the night she fell in the rain. But endings, it turned out, are just beginnings that ran out of courage. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it walks quietly beside you. Hands you a cup of coffee. And stays. And in that staying. In laughter, in work, in the growing of a single young tree. She found the life she'd been chasing all along. Because real love doesn't save you. It simply lets you begin again.